Hello. In this unit, we will be studying drugs and poisons. Prescription drugs are a multi-billion-dollar business. Drug manufacturers produce enough barbiturates and tranquilizers each year to give every person in the US 40 pills. That's a lot of pills. Also, drug and alcohol abuse does not only affect the user, but can affect other people as well, as you can see from these statistics on alcohol-related traffic deaths and injuries. These were the questions that we started the unit with on the case study. The answers to these questions can be found on page 250 in your textbook or on the internet if you prefer. One thing that's important to note here is the fact that a lot of the drugs that she took were not prescribed for her. They were actually prescribed for somebody else. So that's an important thing to remember because a trained pharmacist will recognize potential drug interactions and would not fill certain prescriptions together. So you always want to make sure that you take prescriptions from the same pharmacy and also that you don't take anything that's prescribed for someone else. So the definition of toxicology is it's the study of poisons and the identification of drugs and other substances that a person may have used and the effects of these poisons and drugs on the body. People are exposed to drugs or toxins in several ways. Sometimes by ingesting them so they enter the gastrointestinal system. Other times by inhaling them so that they enter into the lungs. They can also be injected into the bloodstream or absorbed through the skin. Toxicity is the degree to which a substance is poisonous or can cause injury. The toxicity of a substance can depend on several factors. First of all, the dose, how much the person takes. Secondly, the duration, which is the frequency and length of the exposure. The nature of the exposure, was it ingested, inhaled, absorbed through the skin, etc. And of course, there is a chance that the drug or toxin could interact with substances already present in the body if the person is taking other medications. Some substances are only indirectly toxic to the body because the substance that the drug is converted to or metabolized into in the body is harmful. For example, wood alcohol, when metabolized in the body, is converted into toxic metabolites in the liver, one of them being formaldehyde, which is highly toxic. So exposure to drugs and other toxins may be determined by performing chemical tests to analyze various parts of the body. So if we're talking about an individual that is living, we would analyze body fluids, stomach contents, skin, or hair can all be analyzed for drugs. When there is a fatality involved with a lethal exposure and the person is no longer alive, then we can study the internal organs, particularly the liver, and the vitreous humor, which is the fluid of the eye, which can also be analyzed. Toxic substances are also classified by how people are exposed to them. People are exposed to them intentionally, meaning that they take them under a doctor's supervision or over the counter to treat some illness or relieve pain. Accidentally, with unintentional overdoses or harmful combinations, or deliberately taking an overdose of pills to commit suicide or poisoning to harm or murder another individual. Although poisoning is popular in murder mysteries and detective stories, in reality, it's not a common form of murder. In fact, poisoning causes less than half of 1% of all homicides. That being said, throughout history, some notable individuals have died from poisoning, and we're going to discuss more about some of those cases later. Accidental drug overdoses are far more common than poisonings. Given the celebrity names that we wrote on the board at the beginning of this unit and that we talked about, we can see that. Throughout history, poisoning was actually a way for royal families in Europe to settle disputes. Arsenic and cyanide were widely used. In fact, the use of arsenic was so widespread that it actually became known as inheritance powder. Today, the commonly used poisons include arsenic, cyanide, strychnine, and ethylene glycol, which is the chemical name for antifreeze. Antifreeze is easily mixed with a drink because antifreeze actually has a sweet taste, so you can mask the taste by putting it into a sweet drink. Toxicologists have to distinguish between two types of poisoning: acute poisoning and chronic poisoning. Acute poisoning is caused by a high dose over a short time period, for example, ingestion of cyanide, and it would produce immediate symptoms. Chronic poisoning is caused by lower doses over a much longer time period, which produces symptoms gradually. And mercury and lead poisoning are examples of chronic poisoning. Be sure to put an example of each type of poisoning on your handout as you're answering this. So, toxicologists know that there are a lot of illegal drugs in the United States with no accepted medical use, such as heroin or LSD. So, drug panels will test for those. But there's also a lot of legal substances that are in the same class as some of these illegal drugs. Controlled substances are legal drugs whose manufacture, distribution, and possession are restricted because of the effect of these drugs and the potential for use, potential for overuse, rather, and abuse. These are medications that physicians prescribe for various conditions. And not every physician is able to prescribe these. You have to have a certain license in order to prescribe a controlled substance. So the 5 classes of controlled substances include hallucinogens, narcotics, stimulants, anabolic steroids, and depressants. Our next unit will go into all of these, their effects, symptoms of an overdose, what they do to the body, and examples. So, drug offenders make up more than half of the federal prison population and about 20% of the state prison population. Since the early 1990s, arrests for drug abuse violations have increased steadily. In fact, drug abuse violations top the list of the leading arrest offenses in the United States. So this finishes part 1 of your notes on forensic toxicology. See me in class if you have any questions.